The barriers to trade in Canada are sometimes higher between provinces than internationally. Deloitte has estimated that those barriers add the equivalent of almost 7% tariffs on goods moving across borders inside Canada. That's a massive cost to businesses and consumers. Ryan Manucha is a research fellow at the Howe Institute and also the author of a book on this subject. Ryan, great to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Amanda. Thank you so much.
So we do often hear about these interprovincial trade barriers. And let's just start with the very real costs. We can add them up. They're probably hard to measure, but we know they're costing us all money.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's estimates that are produced routinely between 8 to 14% extra on the cost of goods that we purchase as a result of internal trade barriers. One more concrete example, freight trucking. A new estimate just came out. The interprovincial trade barriers hike freight trucking by about 8.6%. So it adds up, especially the higher up you are in the value chain.
So, and some of the, we've been talking about this for so long, Ryan, that it's almost comical. For instance, speaking of transport, which is a hugely important part of our supply chains, of our economy, trucks have regulations that keep them from traveling at certain times of day in BC and other times of day in Alberta, which gives them this narrow little window to get across that border. These feel like really easy things to fix. Given you've been watching this for a while, what are the impediments to fixing these types of barriers?
There's a number of reasons when it comes to internal trade barriers in general, and you can kind of triangulate them to trucking. It can come down to just general inertia, the regulatory process. Sometimes stakeholders have vested interests in the rules being the way they are. Sometimes it's difficult for regulators from one jurisdiction to negotiate an outcome with another. And sometimes, with trucking, it's physical limitations, right? Sometimes you have a really heavy truck, hard for them to travel across the prairies where the sand is a little softer than across the Canadian Shield in Ontario.
Some Canadians might be surprised to know that we actually not that long ago put together a Canadian free trade agreement. It's literally an agreement for free trade between provinces. It sounds ridiculous, but there it is. How's that working out? Is it as free as we need it to be?
The Canadian Free Trade Agreement is an excellent addition to our arsenal in sort of liberalizing internal trade. Look, Canada is the second largest country by landmass, and in order to keep us as one, and instead of balkanizing, you have to accommodate local differences. So it's okay, and the Constitution allows for provinces to have areas of jurisdiction, and because of that, and because of local circumstances, you might see differences in rules and regulations. But it's good to be able to harmonize where possible, whether it be on certain trucking regulations, first aid kits, construction codes, alcohol limitations, wherever you can find them, where they're unnecessary impediments to free commerce domestically.
As with most of this type of protection, Ryan, at the bottom of it all is protection of industries and jobs, right? Nobody would do this if they didn't have some kind of well-intentioned interest in keeping the business there. Liquor's a good example. Alberta went out and dropped its barriers with other provinces, including BC, but recently the two provinces got into a fight over booze because BC is not reciprocating and Alberta doesn't appreciate it. It still seems probably to many Canadians kind of amazing that something like buying booze, ordering direct from a winery in British Columbia is impossible for somebody in Alberta right now.
Absolutely, and the story of interprovincial trade sees beer and liquor and wine flow through it pretty much from Confederation to the present. And I think beer and liquor and wine is something that many are engaged with, and so it becomes very real. And the most recent Supreme Court decision on our constitutional free trade clause was about a gentleman trying to go buy beer in Quebec and bring it back into New Brunswick. And I think it makes it very palpable for us. That's why, it's very salient, when we get into the topics like workers' compensation and occupational health safety limits. Mm-hmm. Those are not as sexy internal trade barriers, but they're just as impactful.
Absolutely.
In many cases.
And in fact, labor mobility is one thing that's very much affected by some of the regulatory issues from across border. Is there a bigger role for the federal government in all of this?
Absolutely. Leadership from amongst the first ministers, so premiers and federal government, very, very important to break that gridlock, as you exactly said. So there are many vested interests who want to keep the rules in many cases the way they are, that protect local fiefdoms. And in order to break them, you need that strong leadership, both from the federal government and from amongst the premiers. Ryan,
so good to have you for this. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Ryan Manucha is a research fellow at the Howe Institute. Time for the takeaway and how we clean up when company is coming. For 30 years, Canadians have been sold on the value of free trade. Trade that's so good that more of it is only better. And there's little doubt that our economy has benefited over time, most notably the ability to sell our products and services tariff-free to the biggest and most robust economy on the planet, while also aligning our interests with that trading partner south of our border. Adding in Mexico created what should be a regional powerhouse that is the envy of the world. Recently, America's view of trade seems to have cooled a little, with an emphasis on Made in America running up against the central thesis of free trade, which is that goods and services should be made wherever it's most efficient to do so. That shift causes some trouble for Canada and our exporting businesses, but for now, and likely the foreseeable future, we still have a solid trade deal to work with. Where we run into trouble is actually our own backyard, with provincial barriers adding to the cost of doing business inside this country, but also through protections that we've layered on over many decades for various industries and businesses. These protections can have the effect of reducing competition. When that happens, our businesses become less efficient. One way to make sure we don't engage in that kind of self-sabotage is through trade deals. There's nothing like the bright light of an outsider's gaze, sort of how we clean up our house best when we know company's coming. Forging new trade deals forces Canada to confront its own behavior and do better, at least well enough to meet the standards that gain access to new markets. There may be many things we're kicking under the sofa right now that should be set right. My takeaway? Trade deals are a good thing because they open markets for our business, but they also force us to be the best version of ourselves. That's Taking Stock for this week. I'm Amanda Lang. Thanks for being with us.